Hey, Mark, thanks. Super happy to be here. As you said in that great introduction, I'm an engineer and a former TEDx organizer, how we know each other, but lately been focused on Web3 and community building, and I'm super excited to share things about that with you guys today.
I'm one of the things that we've been talking about. We've been taking bites of this apple for the last couple of months, trying to understand how technology is changing everything. Remember, TED, the big T is technology, and going in and looking at what's changing. And I thought you would be the perfect guy to help us become buzzword compliant, for lack of a better word, because there's so many new terms. I feel like I'm Googling things all the time. There's DAO and NFT and crypto and DeFi. And I mean, your shirt says decentralize everything. So why don't we start with delivering the promise of what the title of the show was what's a DAO? DAO. What's a DAO?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So a DAO is one of the more interesting evolutions that we've seen in Web3. And when we're ready, we can talk a little bit more about what Web3 means and how we've gotten here. But a DAO essentially it stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization. And it's basically a community that has voting power and everyone has a way to contribute into the community, but it's decentralized. So there's no governing body, there's no board, there's no president, nothing like that. And you typically are voting and managing this community as a whole, as a community with some level of influence. And that influence is typically connected to either a fundraising mechanic or a bank account or some goal or objective that this DAO, this decentralized organization, is trying to achieve in the world.
So I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. When I'm running a company, we have an idea to do something. Is that the right mechanism for a DAO, or is a DAO something completely different?
So a DAO in the simplest fashion, my best example to explain it is everybody's been a part of like a softball team at work or something
Sure.
where a fantasy football teams where everybody had to put in the same amount of money and there's a group of people, let's just call it 10 people, everybody puts in $10. There's no team captain or board or anything, and everybody votes, hey, what evening do we want to play softball on? I vote for Tuesday. Everybody has an equal vote. And maybe somebody put in additional funds. Maybe they have two votes because of this. But that simplistically is a good example of a DAO right there.
Well, so you brought up the idea of game, and I studied gamification and game theory and serious games and all that stuff. But one of the tenets in there is that there was always a leader. There's rules, but there's always a leader, someone and what you're saying is there, by definition, there is no leader.
Yeah, so it goes through an interesting like 1 or 2 or 3 step evolution where someone has to initiate the DAO, right? And so for all the best examples of DAOs, there's typically someone or a small group of people, we'll talk about some examples, who says, hey, we should do this thing. And then once they build the infrastructure of the DAO, what they're trying to do in the code, we're not going to get into any of the tech, but once it's set up, and it's established, you may have individuals who have slightly more authority, but they're operating based on how the community votes. But for the most part, it's leaderless, it's boardless, it's governmentless. And you will see through examples of this conversation, it sounds a little scary. It sounds a little nuts, to be honest, like a lot of things in Web3. But the efficiencies it has, the transparency that it provides, there are unbelievable benefits and considerations. It's not for every community, but for TEDx organizers, TEDx communities, and people who are interested in talks like this one, I think you will be considering a DAO at one point in your future.
You bring up something interesting. It makes me think to 50 years ago when I came to Santa Barbara, and there were several very, very well-known communes here who everybody had gotten together and there was no leader and they pooled their resources, and it was mostly around farming and then selling foods in a farmer's market and very early days of all of that. Is it like that?
Yeah, there's a heavy parallel with a project like a commune or something like this. And typically, if you were to explore commune experiments or individual societies, socialism, or anything that's trying to essentially theoretically be decentralized or be like a DAO, typically people will always go back to, but we don't trust the leaders of the commune. We're not sure if this thing is really doing it. And that's what makes a DAO special, is because of blockchain technology, everything is public. You can see all the transactions and all the operations that the DAO is participating in. So there's no way you can question the commune leaders, and eventually you don't even need them. So that's the difference. That's what the technology, that's what's different about a DAO, is with blockchain technology, you can guarantee that what they say or what people claim is happening really, truly is.
Is it fair to say then that where we are culturally in our adoption of technology and our understanding of technology is we've become very adept at using technology to suss out things and to be able to look for transparency, and we're I think by design our shields are up most of the time, right? And what you're suggesting is, hey, we're using that to our advantage to say, hey, those shields, they're all clear. We can see right through them, and we know people are going to check on everything that's being done. So let's just start with that as the premise, knowing that we create a trust abundant environment. Is that correct?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think what we've experienced as a global society, we're at like 500 years into massive centralization, like big government bodies and organizations and things are really controlling a lot of things. And even if they have the best intentions and everything that organizations may claim to want to do, there's still the chance that something's going wrong, and you want that transparency. And that really, especially if people are providing fundraising or putting in energy or participating with their time and showing up to things, they really want to make sure that this organization that they're showing up for or participating in or giving their money is doing what they say they're doing. And I think that's the big difference, is so many things are centralized now that even if you deep down believe everything is going on properly, it may not. And it should be super public with DAO ledger format.
So I think now's kind of a good time to go back to Web3, because the web changed everything. Okay, 1999, 1990, in that place where it kind of got popular. Like you had a website, there was the Mozilla browser, there were, I could do these things. And then Web 2 came out and we had a complete different experience with the internet, right? And then we had broadband. So it changed everything. Everything changed. Am I wrong? Am I overstating it to say that Web 3 is going to change everything as well, because it's going to change a fundamental relationship with finance?
Yeah, I think not only finance, but everything else, because we could be talking decentralization of medical records and car titles and housing deeds, and all of these things can be decentralized. And really quickly, I think, like you said, Mark, it's a good opportunity to quickly explain in one sentence each, Web 1, 2, and then 3. So Web 1 was the regular internet. It showed up. You didn't really have any control or any freedom. Like, websites were there. You went to the websites, you read the content, and that was it. You couldn't comment. There were no blogs back then. There was definitely no social media. That was Web 1, just the internet. You show up and you get what you get. Web 2 was your ability to participate in these platforms. So you could own a piece of it, and you could have your own blog on Blogger. You could have your own page on Facebook. You could have your own Twitter and Instagram and all these things, but it was still centralized. So if Facebook wanted to change an algorithm and your business was relying on that, bad situation. Or if even an account or platform wants to freeze you, think about YouTubers who get their channels penalized on YouTube. You're reliant on this platform. You have no control. That's Web 2. Web 3 is when you own it. Web 3 is when that's the decentralized aspect of it, is there's no one body, government, leader, board that can withhold whatever it is that you're participating in within this Web3 world, whether it be, let's just go over it, assets like cryptocurrencies and NFTs, or data or information or anything. You own it, you control it, and it's decentralized. And that's so powerful for individuals and so powerful for communities.
we're it feels like we're in the early days of this, but things have been changing for a while. We're not at the very beginning of it. It was still early days. What's what does the industry say is the best estimation of when the majority of the technology we touch on a daily basis has taken on these Web3 capabilities? For instance, I'm thinking of a simple thing like a credit card, and the things I've read is maybe we don't have credit cards. Like, it's finally gotten to where it's easy to pay for something. So how long is it going to take? Is it going to get easier, or is it going to be harder for a while?
Yes, what a great question. So as you know, Mark, being a futurist and a technologist, for example, there was almost a 2, 3, maybe even 4-decade gap between when we had the internet and when it was finally publicly available, and you have the explosion of the paradigm shift from 1995 to 1999, where everybody gets the internet. Blockchain technology, Web3, is relatively the same. Computer scientists have been writing papers about blockchain since the 80s and 90s. It's old, it's kind of boring, and it's actually not that flashy. But what has changed? So in 2008, there was the impotence for the first true game-changing project, which was the Bitcoin white paper that came out only 6 weeks later on Halloween Day, 6 weeks later in the fall of 2008, after Lehman and Bear Stearns popped. And it was an example, the first ever example of how to use blockchain technology in a truly effective way. So we've known about it and we've seen it. You know how exponential growth works, Mark. It's slower and slower for the longest time than even a small linear growth, but eventually something happens and it explodes. And I really think we're maybe not quite in the middle of what they call the knee of the curve, but we're almost there. And I don't think you're going to be throwing away your credit cards in the next, 8 to 10 years, but like, your grandkids may never use credit cards like you have in your life. That why would we need those? So it's coming. I do think we have another healthy period of evolution. If you're thinking like, oh geez, I missed all this, definitely not.
I'm curious, is this going to be a generational adoption thing?
That's a great question. I think I don't think so, because for example, if you think back, just look at a couple of things, right? Like smartphone technology, 2007. That's only been around for 15 years. Did we have to wait a whole generation for that? I think technological leaps are tightening and tightening. So if you are someone who wants to skip something, you might not be able to jump into the next step. But I don't think you have to wait for a whole nother generation anymore. With the internet, maybe, radio, maybe, digital finance, maybe, but I don't think so. I think it's faster now.
Yeah, you brought up my grandkids, and I'm thinking about like how it's all different for them. I mean, it's 100%. Every single thing is different for them. Give us an example, Jake, of something that is where decentralization should probably happen sooner rather than later because of the positive benefit of it.
Okay, that's a great question. I could take this in a couple of different ways, but I'll explain one of my favorite examples of decentralization, and we'll use a DAO example for the sake of this episode. So last fall, I'm not sure if non-historians will know, but something happened with one of the most rare, oldest versions of the US Constitution. Not the one that's the original actual US Constitution that sits in DC, but there's only 13 original copies. And this was the first one that was going up for public auction in November of last fall at the Sotheby's auction house. So one of the oldest, essentially the oldest, potentially privately held version of the Constitution was going up for auction. They thought it was worth $20 million. So could you imagine being a historian or a museum curator or someone like this who understands that, wow, this artifact, something that had not been sold for 33 years, is going to go onto the auction house? This could be horrible. What are people going to do with it? They could destroy it. They could put it against this massive paywall. Here's what we need to do. So this community showed up and in 4 or 5 days formed this thing called Constitution DAO. In 4 days, there was 20,000 people in the Discord, okay? About 75% of those people raised money. They raised $45 million in under a week to show up to that Sotheby's auction house. And they had to get a little bit fancy about who could be there to represent and essentially
Right, because there's no
live
leader.
in person. Exactly. They had to get a little fancy about this, like who was there in person voting for
Right.
the DAO. There was
Right.
a little bit of confusion, but they almost bought the Constitution.
Oh, they didn't get it?
They didn't get it. And we'll talk about one of the disbenefits of this, or the reason why it didn't happen, because there is one downside with this transparency in the DAO aspect. Because if everything's transparent, people know how much how big your treasury is. They knew that they could not tolerate more than about a $40 million bid. And so someone just waited until 41 and then bought it. But it's an example. It's an example about how community or an event or something that literally would have been impossible before 2015, smart contracts allowed DAOs. But now people can rally and create even a quick rapid event to do some social good, to protect something, to achieve a goal that would be impossible without something like a DAO.
So we got a kind of final question around the finance side of this. Are there returns to a DAO? So could someone put together a DAO much like a fund, an investment fund? Like, we're going to create a DAO and we're going to go invest in sustainable startups, for instance, and we're going to go raise $100 million. Am I thinking about it right, or is that not really the right way to go about it?
You got it exactly right. So Peter Thiel, which everyone on the show most likely recognizes the name, PayPal co-founder with Elon. He has, I think, in their treasury, like $2-something billion. It's one of the biggest. There's only 3 DAOs that have over $1 billion in their treasury. And I was just reading lately about essentially like crypto trust DAOs, and they have one. So absolutely right. It's a different way to do that. So how would that work? Just for example, say you have a hedge fund manager, right? And people put in money and then they manage this whole fund together. It's essentially like that, except now it's a DAO, and you can vote, and you don't have to just trust Peter Thiel. It's all in the public ledger. So these are the advantages you see.
Jake, it's a brave new world. Oh, wait, Aldous Huxley already said that. Thank you so much for helping explain that part of it.
Thank you, Mark.